And I'm Steve Clemons, and it's a real pleasure to have you all here. We've got extraordinary group here. We have J.P. Pullen, who's the founding editor of Long Lead, and it is Long Lead that is really pioneering a very new form of journalism that I'm going to ask J.P. to talk about. It's powerful. I wish those of us, I'm looking at Kim Dozier and others, you are in video journalism in some ways with CNN, but this is an incredibly powerful way to tell stories. And J.P. Pullen is going to talk to us. When we have the star of the show, star is the wrong word, the instigator, the guardian. Excuse me. Rob Reynolds, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And we have Kathryn Monet, who's the CEO of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. It's very, very powerful to have you all here, and we're going to get to that. But JP, let me just start with you. I want to give you an opportunity to just launch for us and tell us, this is a single vignette of a much larger series that goes into this. And in your form of journalism, of what Long Lead is doing, you have lots of others. And so we're time restricted, but I want you to give us, I want to understand why, how, and what you're trying to achieve tonight and with this project. What would be a win walking out of this? So, as to quote one of the people, we don't just kick the ball down the road.
Thank you for sharing this and inviting all these great people as well, Steve. I appreciate it so much. The win out of tonight is if I can convince one of you people to do something consequential for the veterans that you saw in that video and the many veterans that you didn't see in that video. That's it. It would have been more worth it. And we put a lot of work into this. As you referenced, the production itself is called Home of the Brave. It is a multi-part, multimedia feature that we worked on for about 3 years, from soup to nuts, or from when we first saw the tents on San Vicente till we published it last month. And it's 7 parts. I won't go through all of them. You should go to the website actually and read it. But I will tell you, this is a feast. It's not a snack. It's 35,000 words. So set aside some time. But these veterans certainly deserve that time. The documentary film was created by, directed and written by Rebecca Murga. She is a Bronze Star Army veteran as well. And we wanted to work with a veteran specifically to make this film because as a journalist, we strive towards objectivity, and it is a very difficult thing to do when you have a topic like this. But we also wanted to be able to let the veterans say their part. So getting a veteran filmmaker allowed her to editorialize in that way, and that's what you've seen tonight.
Before I jump to Rob, one of the things I'm interested in is the lawsuit, which we'll get into in a moment. But I also know that we're sitting here in one of the most powerful cities in the world, lots of power, and that actually in many ways does do much for veterans, wants to do things for veterans. We see a lot of this. This seems to be a blind spot, a black hole, something that's not talked about. I certainly was not aware of this travesty in West Los Angeles. I went to UCLA, folks. I used to jog through that property. I saw the first baseball stadium, but I'll tell you, when my first impression was years ago in the mid-1980s when I was running through, I said, wow, this seems to be used more for movie sets than for taking care of veterans. And so, I have that in my mind, but do you think, before I jump to Rob and the lawsuit, which we want to know more about, but are there things that the federal government or the state government in California should be doing that they're not? Where's the dereliction that needs to be fixed?
I think there's a really simple solution to this. Legislate. I mean, just Congress can pass laws that can solve these. There's several problems, and Rob can really drill in. He knows them a lot better than I do, but there are very simple legislative actions that Congress could take to make this problem go away. And also, I have to point out, this is a very unique situation as well. Veteran homelessness is a huge issue across the entire country. We see them everywhere we live, everywhere we go. And I think that we also assume that, someone's taking care of that person. But they aren't. And in this specific instance, that land is owned by the federal government. Now, there's in every other city that may not be the case, but in this one in LA, that those 388 acres are owned by the federal government specifically to house disabled veterans.
Rob, you've grown from being a victim in this circumstance to being a guardian for many others. And you're a proponent and activist with the lawsuit. So many people look up to you, but I'd just like to get I guess the trial begins on August 6th, and there have already been some determinations, as I understand it, by the judge in this case. I don't know if it's the Ninth Circuit in California or not. I hope it is, because it's a pretty cool circuit. But and I know a lot about their judgments, which sometimes come out okay. But I'm interested in you kind of giving us a profile of the legal action underway and why it's so important and what's at stake.
Absolutely. So thank you for being here. There's a lot with the lawsuit. So essentially, like you could see, there's 400 acres of land that was donated to the federal government in 1888 to be a home for disabled veterans. And that property operated that way for nearly 80 years. And around 4,000 to 5,000 veterans actually lived on that land and called it home. And around the end of the Vietnam War, the veterans started getting moved off of the land, evicted from the land. And so we got to this situation where all of these buildings just became vacant. And the same number of veterans that used to live on that property were now homeless in Los Angeles. And the VA was more concerned with its real estate business, renting out to parking lot operators, Brentwood School, UCLA Athletic Complex, oil drilling. The list goes on and on and on. And that was their focus. So we are trying to address some of these illegal leases in the lawsuit. That the law needs to be followed. And the VA's own inspector general, every time it does an audit, it's scathing that the VA is entering into illegal land use agreements. But the VA in West LA will argue and somehow come up with these reasons of how they're not illegal. And they put more focus on anything other than veteran housing at that property. And the only reason we have housing today is because the VA essentially got caught with its pants down in 2020 with veterans camped out around the entire property. It was a national embarrassment for them. So we want to address that. We want to see the housing built on the property that was promised and the land to be returned to the way it was intended, to remain a home for disabled veterans. And one of the big issues at the moment is how those buildings are funded. So they're using the affordable housing model, and essentially how that works is these private developers go out and they solicit funds. They come with tax credits, and there's income limit restrictions on how much income someone can make. But what they didn't take into consideration is that our most disabled veterans get disability compensation. So our veterans that are missing limbs or in wheelchairs are being told that they make too much money and they can't live in the housing next to the hospital where they get their medical care, and are now living in tiny sheds on the property or homeless around the street. And it's really ridiculous because the IRS doesn't count veterans' disability compensation as income. Veterans don't have to pay taxes on that money. But then Housing, Urban, and Development does count it as income. And so we're in this situation where our most disabled veterans are unable to get housing and health care they need.
Have you spoken to members of Congress, Rob, about that? Because as a former Senate staffer, and we have some other staffers in this room, it seems to me inconceivable that someone couldn't write a waiver and fairly move it fairly easy. Dylan is shaking his head no. He's a budget guy, a fiscal guy, works for Senator Murray. I'm going to convince you you're wrong, Dylan. But I'm just interested in why in a case like this a waiver couldn't be done to solve it. I mean, that's different than what JP was just talking about a mandate with the housing side of it. But there's another side on the waiver side and income that seems to me to be a fairly, I wouldn't say easy fix. That trivializes a deeper problem. But have you talked to legislators?
So Congressman Brad Sherman, he recently introduced legislation. I believe.
Is this Brad's district or is it Ted Lieu's district?
It is now. It was Ted Lieu's district, and then last year they did the redistricting.
And Ted gave away the baseball stadiums, right?
He did. So that is one of the big contentions with Congressman Ted Lieu. So in 2013, the judge on the previous lawsuit had ruled that UCLA's baseball stadium was legal. The next day, UCLA spokesperson in the LA Times says they're going to do everything possible to remain on the land. Then Congressman Ted Lieu drafts the West Los Angeles Leasing Act of 2016. And he goes out and touts that legislation to veterans and says, this legislation is to ensure that all leases on the property principally benefit veterans and their families. So everyone hears that and is like, well, this is great because these illegal leases have been a problem. What he didn't tell everyone is within that bill, UCLA got a 10-year lease for a baseball stadium. And he will not answer our questions on that. We've confronted
For the
him
record, we
numerous
did
times.
invite Ted tonight.
I mean,
That's
I'm
true.
not surprised.
Let me. So you have, yeah.
To answer your question, Congressman Brad Sherman, he is now in charge of that area. He did put forward a bill. It's called the Unhousing Disabled Veterans Act, something to that effect. But we'll see how long that actually takes to go into law. And my understanding of that is that I think it'll change the HUD's definition of how income is counted for when veterans are applying to get into housing. But
So Kathryn Monet is the CEO of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. And Kathryn, I don't want to be one of those that's seen this powerful film saying, oh, let's get everybody on the same side. I know there are complexities. There are deep complexities out there that involve how we finance things, land. You operate across the U.S., and I'm sure that one size does not fit all. But as you look at this powerful film that you saw, about the legal case and kind of moving forward, I'd love to get your best assessment of how to fix this equation, because I know you deal in complex equations.
Complexity is my specialty, unfortunately. I think Rob is right on the money. HR 8340, the Sherman bill, is absolutely an important step forward, but I think it only solves one part of the problem when you think about your HUD-VASH vouchers. There is another layer related to funding and tax credit funding specifically that, hopefully the IRS will follow HUD's definition like they say they're going to, but if not, there may be more legislation needed there. I do think, though, that there will be potentially a ripple effect when you think about how this impacts all of the other housing tax credit funded properties across the country. When you think about, the number of units that are actually funded and the share of the development stack, the capital stack that goes into a property.
In your portfolio of concerns about veterans housing, where does this one rate?
Top three.
Top three. What are the other two?
I think a lot about the availability of tax credit funding and the amount of funding that actually gets dedicated to veteran affordable housing versus other affordable housing issues. West LA is kind of its own animal because of the way the land was deeded. So it's got that extra added layer of complexity where the deed actually says, hey, you need to use this for veterans housing versus just land that VA owns, right? But I do think that there are other issues related to how we move unsheltered veterans onto housing that warrant a look as well.
JP, when in this project, one of the things that also comes to mind as somebody who knows Brentwood and Santa Monica, I know this area intimately. I've run all over it, etc. It is simultaneously it's kind of like Aspen at the beach, right? So it's hyper wealthy, hyper privileged. You also have the film and media industry out there, which a big chunk of it is progressive. I never presume the politics in this, but how does LA and particularly West LA, why have they not become better allies in fixing this, or are there other elements in this story that we don't know?
It's a good question. I mean, I'm not a Los Angelino.
You're from Washington State, but that's
by way
okay.
of Boston too. So I'm definitely not from LA. But I've spoken to a couple of different sources, and one person who lived in Brentwood and spoke to us for the story. He told me that 95% of the people in Brentwood are in favor of developing this land in a way that's positive for the veterans, and there's a 5% that are really vocal about using this property for their own means and ends, and that to that end is where the Brentwood School is. Rob would be able to speak to that better. You're on the ground, but you could assume that a lot of the folks in the media industry are progressive and will give, and frankly, Arnold Schwarzenegger, 25, was it 25? 25 of those tiny sheds came from him. And that's great and wonderful, but that's not necessary. I mean, that is not his job to do. It was his job at one point or another, but even still, as the governor of California, that this was not necessarily his problem. Now, there is a California soldier's home on the property, but this is a federal land. This is a federal issue. So, whatever the folks of Los Angeles think, positively or negatively about this, it's not their problem to solve necessarily.
So
Rob may disagree, though.
So Rob and Kathryn, I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions here. One is, as I understand it, the judge in this has come out and found discrimination is already in place. Would love to understand what that means, how important that is, because even though the trial's beginning, there have already been findings by the judge in this case that I think have legal standing, which are really interesting. But I think the second thing is what we saw in this were these ongoing commitments, like with Congressman Ted Lieu, the connectivity between lease and revenue coming in and being connected somehow to solving this homeless problem. In that, is there? I guess my question, maybe it's more of a Kathryn question, is what is the mechanism for accountability in that? Because it sounds as if a transaction has happened with regard to these leases and commitments made, even legislated, that there should be action going. And then we see a program to build homes and a decade or decade plus long stalling of paralysis in that. No paralysis in building the baseball stadium, by the way, but paralysis in the other side of the equation. I'm just interested in, you're a DC type. What are the mechanisms for accountability other than a fantastic reception and showing an evening and with Kim Dozier and others here? So, but why don't you start with the equation, and then I want to come to Rob on the discriminatory stuff. So,
Okay. Well, I think accountability is hard, right? Congressional oversight is a thing, but it only works so far as Congress. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at you. I used to be a Murray staffer.
I mean, there are
so
others.
I get it. But,
Dylan's not the only staffer here. There are other staffers here.
But the extent to which Congress is willing to hold VA accountable, and outside actors are too, is a real thing. But there's only so much pressure you can really put on VA, and quite frankly, 10 years is a long time to develop affordable housing. But in a lot of places, it's not. Like I can think of properties here in DC that have taken 15 years upwards to get through, like environmental impact surveys, getting your capital stack together, and doing all of that. And so, in the grand scheme of things, I'm always a fan of aggressive timelines, and I do think that housing should be a lot quicker to come together, but we just don't
One
have.
more question before I go to Rob.
Okay.
Should protests become part of this? Should you create a little pain, a little punch, a little nudge of uncomfortable pressure?
By whatever means necessary, right? I would not rule out any mechanism. There are people outside, and it's not easy being outside.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we have to suffer a little bit, what is that in comparison
Right.
to what they're struggling with?
Rob Reynolds, what are your thoughts on the discrimination? Help us understand that legal dimension, but then secondly, after having interviewed literally hundreds of people and also incredible heroes around the country that are involved in every dimension, I have to tell you that one of the blind spots I find in kind of the veterans engagement industry is the tendency to look at these heroes as apart from us. They are us. And I think there's also, a tendency to look at problems and people needing support. Of course, there are some, as opposed to also understanding their incredible strengths that veterans bring to this, particularly with the skills and discipline they have there. The fact that, they're able to live in very harsh circumstances is a very interesting sign of strength. But I'm interested in this because I don't look at it as necessarily your associate's responsibility to be part of those protests, but you are doing that by way of the legal thing. But I'm interested in what sort of, tell us about the discrimination side, but what would you like to see others do in partnership?
Sure. So I'm learning all of this as I go along as well.
You seem to be pretty good at that.
I appreciate that. So the federal government Department of Justice had filed many motions to dismiss, arguing that their leases were illegal, they were doing everything lawfully. The judge disagreed and threw out their motions to dismiss. Then on summary judgment, the plaintiff's attorneys argued that the VA's practice of leasing out these parcels of land to these developers that use the tax credits facially discriminates against veterans. The reason he ruled in that is because it discriminates. The more disabled you are, the less likely you are to get into housing. And the judge felt that that was discriminatory, that the VA, in his own words, as the judge said, you can't outsource discrimination. So you're going out to try to get these developers to come in, but in return, what's happening here is your most disabled veterans, the ones that are missing limbs, can't even get into housing, which just doesn't make any sense. That shouldn't be happening. And a lot of these remedies, I think, will come through in trial and figure out ways to fix this. And on the other side of this as well, say you have a veteran that's just makes it into housing within the income that's required or in this income threshold. If they were to try to get a job to start returning back to the workforce, they could very easily price out of that housing and then be back out on the street. So it creates this situation where they're afraid to even start trying to get back into work because they're afraid that if they go out, they'll lose their housing and they'll be back to square one. So obviously this needs to change. Something needs to change. This can't be going on the way it is. And I think with accountability, just to go back to what you're saying, I think the reason why a lot of these leases have been able to stay on the property and do what they've done for all these years is, you can imagine Brentwood School is one of the most affluent, wealthy schools in Los Angeles, $50,000 per year per student. So a lot of influential people send their kids there. A lot of people that send their kids there spend a lot of money lobbying to local politicians in the area. Same with UCLA, same with oil drilling. So our members of Congress in Southern California, within that district, are more concerned with appeasing their wealthy constituents than they are the homeless veterans. You can ignore a homeless veteran, but they're not going to ignore their constituents that are spending a lot of money lobbying. And just to go in, what Brentwood School has just recently done that we were able to stop is before we even got a summary judgment, last year, Brentwood School spent around $100,000 lobbying Congress, and they've spent a lot more over the years. But they spent this to change the West Los Angeles Leasing Act or amend the law and essentially take away some of the authority from the Inspector General so that their lease could remain on the property. And they were trying to do that before the judge could rule on the case. Luckily, we were able to find out about it early and we got media attention on it and that got squashed. But it just goes to show you what these entities do. They're more concerned with safeguarding their own interests than helping veterans.
JP, before I go to the audience, we'll take some questions. I'm really interested in this form of journalism and what you're doing in this role, because it's interesting, because when you watch something like this, and I watch it also skeptically, I've seen this is the second time, as you can tell, I get emotional. I think it's a powerful story. But journalistically, this runs close to, it feels like advocacy, but it's also journalism. And you're raising this up with a news hook of August 6th and how you're doing it. I've got a friend, Kevin Cirilli's in here, who works with Blue Star Families and others that are out there. This is kind of broad, Kevin's right here, this broad network of groups trying to focus on veterans, veteran spouses, veterans mental health, veteran support. This is something I didn't know about until I saw it on the super secret listserv that I'm on. And I immediately posted it at the time. But I'm interested in a way in which the journalism surfaces in other ways, what you would like to see journalistically and editorially happen in the ecosystem of understanding of that, which is different than advocacy. I'm just sort of interested in how you define that edge.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of bristle when you say advocacy as well, because what we
Well,
no, and it's okay.
I mean, you should bristle because maybe I'm saying it wrong. I mean,
well,
maybe,
no, I mean, objectively,
I want to be an advocate. Let's just be clear. You know,
I
so
don't.
I'm over that line. Okay,
I don't.
I know you don't. I know
Yeah.
you don't. You want to surface the content of this story and have people come out where they will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
But
think,
I got to tell you, I'm on Rob's side.
I think we were fair to a fault at times, but having heard back from folks who work in the VA who have read the entire thing, which is again no small feat, they're grateful that we put this out there because they can see the injustice. And now, so like I said, I bristle against advocacy journalism because that is not what it is that we're aspiring to do. But I will say this in front of all you and the cameras, that I'm very grateful that the judge has issued this summary judgment because now it's a matter of fact that the vets have been discriminated against, and I can lean forward and say, great, I am on Rob's side on this too. It's very, very important. So what we do at Longlead is, every feature that we produce, and these things, this one took 3 years, some of them take a year. It's all about impact. From our first story to this one, our first one was about the world's deepest freediver, but it was really about mental health and overcoming personal trauma. So all the different productions that we put out, from podcasts to multimedia, they're really trying to surface deeper impact. Just for example, a month before this came out, so it was like we were like a python eating 2 basketballs. We put out a
Right.
podcast about gun violence.
Right.
So it can be a lot.
Well, it is very, very compelling journalism, and I feel we're all very lucky to have seen this. So let's go to all of you who would like to make a comment. Yes, right here, and we're going to go. And if you'll, and you get a mic, so I don't have to repeat any questions that are not on the mic. So there we go. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Dana Kogar. I'm a consultant who supports the VA for the past 15 years now, mostly Veterans Health Administration and in communications, but communications touches everything. So there's so much I want to say, and I'm going to be very brief. First of
Good.
all, Steve, I choked up talking to Cassandra tonight, who I just met, and I'm like, oh my God, she's going to think I'm nuts, because I get very emotional about it.
Most of DC thinks that about me anyway. So,
Well, you're not supposed to show that emotion in DC. So, but I feel very strongly about this, and there's so much. So people run on veterans and VA, right? Our congressmen and women and our senators, they run on VA. I don't think there's malice there, but it's a great issue to run on. The legislation is often written by 20-some-year-old staffers, and that's not a dig. But then they send it over to
Not a
VA.
dig, Dylan.
It's not a dig, Dylan, I promise. But then it gets sent over to VA, and you say, let us hear your thoughts.
Right.
A lot of times, VA doesn't come back with any thoughts. They have an entire department that's dedicated to that, OCLA. Do they come back, Dylan, and talk to you about it? Okay, well, thanks, Dylan, but
Can I just say the money guy is a very important guy to.
they are. But VA needs to do a better job with that.
Right.
If you feel like the legislation is breaking you,
Right.
then you have to take a role in legislation. And I
Right.
believe Congress when they
Yeah.
say, what can we do to help you?
Well, thank
The
you.
other thing, I'm just going to say one other quick thing. People inside of VACO wear lapel pins that say one VA. They believe that. But if they watch this movie, Veterans Health Administration doctors and staff would say, we say all the time, we've got to get these people off the street. This is a mental health issue. But it's a VBA problem because it's a benefits issue. And it goes round and round, and then nothing ever gets done because it's not actually one VA.
Well, thank you for that perspective. Let me get some other comments, questions. Yes, right here. This is our journalist from military.com.
Could I ask Rob, you're saying 100% disability, that knocks you out. You're disqualified, at least in West LA. What I want to ask is, how about 100% disability? How does it work in LA in qualifying for HUD-VASH? Does it knock you out of HUD-VASH? And also, what you hear from mayors all over the country is that, whatever the subsidy is, it won't cover the rent for the units. The rent is just too high.
Right.
Ms. Monet, do you know, does HUD-VASH cover rents, or is it adjustable? What can you do about
Great
that?
specific question on the economic equation. Rob?
So with HUD-VASH, so if you have what's called these project-based units, that's what's being built on the West LA VA, the income threshold is much, much lower. So it'll be 30 to 50% of the area media income. And that is what will render the most disabled veterans out of getting into these housing units. And when you go to get a tenant-based voucher that wasn't built with tax credits, that is 80% of the AMI, so it's much higher. So veterans can get a voucher out in the community, but a lot of times the more disabled they are, they need to be close to the hospital. They go out into the community 15 miles away from the VA and they have no support network, they fall back into homelessness.
Right.
And also, Social Security plays into that too.
It does, yes.
The Jeffrey Powers, v. McDonough. Jeffrey Powers is going to be kicked out of his housing as soon as he gets Social Security.
Wow. Kathryn, did you want to comment?
No, I think what they said is absolutely true. The one part of the question that they didn't address is your question about whether the voucher amounts go up and down, and they do, right? Like you pay 30% of your income, and then the voucher covers the rest. But everything they said is 100%.
Kevin, really?
I'll be quick. I love the dogs. I thought that was a really...
Hold the mic up.
Sorry, I love the dogs in the movie, and I apologize for being late, but I thought that really was powerful as a dog owner myself. Thank you, Kathryn, for all the work that you're doing. Earlier today, I was with Kathy Roth-Truquet, of course, the smartest person I've ever met in Washington and the founder and CEO of Blue Star Families, and she was telling us about these pulse surveys that we do. The next one's coming out the week before if there's going to be a presidential debate, and 90% of Americans trust military families. So we have this conversation in the country about no one trusts the media. Sorry. No one trusts journalists. No one trusts lawmakers. But people trust military families. And the solution that is found in this issue can be reflected into the society like other issues that the military has confronted first.
Right.
Back into solving the broader issue for homelessness. And so I guess my question is, how might this solution address the broader solution of the mental health crisis amongst the homeless population in America?
So I think if the judge rules in favor of what probably all of us up here want him to rule in favor of, right, you'll probably see Social Security and other forms of income being excluded, right? So more disabled people will have more access to housing, which would be amazing. If it's permanent supportive housing with HUD-VASH, it absolutely comes with mental health care, other supports and services, case management.
Mm-hmm.
In medical centers where they're running the program correctly.
Right.
I'm going to caveat that, right? In places where it's working well, it will work well and will come with services. But, that's it. There's probably a need for more services and supports in addition to
Rob,
what's out there.
JP?
I'm going to actually come the other way and talk the doomsday scenario. Because I've asked for 3 years, every time I talk to Rob, I said, hey, Rob, are they going to settle? Rob, are they going to settle? And every single time, Rob says, no, they're not going to settle. And why would you? You've already settled once and you got snookered. Why would you settle this time? You have nothing to lose. They have nothing to lose. If they do lose this case, though, and they appeal it, all of this is presupposed, at least from our reporting.
They meaning the VA?
The veterans.
Yeah. Oh, the veterans.
If they were to continue along and appeal, all of this goes back to Public Law 58-852. It's in 1958, and it established the veteran benefit system. And I actually I read up on this today.
Right.
And the VA points to that law and says we cannot build housing. We cannot build new permanent housing for veterans. They say they can't even build a new tiny shed.
Right.
If one of those falls over, someone has to donate it. And so if the veterans continued on, if they happen to lose this case and they decide to go on, that law could be put into some serious jeopardy. And why not? You have nothing to lose. Burn it down.
Well, let's take one. We'll take two quick last questions, and then we're going to get to drinking. It's David, right? Dennis. And I want to also recognize his friend here, Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who was former Chief of Staff of the State Department, and Colin Powell's Chief of Staff, very, very engaged in veterans issues. And so, Dennis, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to go to Rob Harleston of C-SPAN real quick. So go ahead.
I just want to make a comment, and maybe my comment may some of us may feel a little uncomfortable. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Steve, for the invite, and this was really great for me. And Rob, I want to apologize to you, and Rob's probably saying, why? Because when we met, I was talking to him about a book I had written, and then I didn't know who Rob was. And now knowing who Rob is, I feel bad because he's the most important person in this room. Now, I say that to say this. In the book that I was talking to Rob about, I wrote a chapter called Pawns of Foreign Policy. And why do I say that? It's because of the fact people like Rob and the people we saw in the documentary. I'm a veteran myself, spent 28 years in the Air Force. It is easy to get us into wars.
Right.
So easy. But then, unfortunately, as we go fight the wars, we have to fight for our benefits.
Right.
And that is so sad for all the journalists in here. And unfortunately, as you see the writing on the wall, we'll probably be in another war here real soon. And for the journalists in here, you need to talk about, okay, we're in this war.
Right.
Now, what are we going to do with the veterans as they come back? So I want each and every one of you to think about that.
Thank you, Dennis. I appreciate that comment. Let's run up to Rob Harleston. No, we
Don't worry about the microphone.
no, we have to do it because it's being video recorded, and you should know that as a C-SPAN congressional editor.
First of all, thank you all very much for this, Steve, JP, Rob,
Kathryn.
The military, and I can say this from experience. My father was in the Army for 33 years. I was in the Air Force. The military is a somewhat unique living experience. How much of what the homeless veterans have to deal with could be alleviated if they were better trained, if they were better prepared for the transition out of the military lifestyle and into, or out of the military lifestyle, and then into the civilian world. There are a lot of things that folks
Right.
here in the civilian world who have never been in the military take for granted. And there are a lot of things
Right.
that you don't learn being in the military for 3, 4, 5, 30 years that once you become a civilian are very difficult to
Sure.
deal with.
Yeah.
How much could we alleviate some of this problem if we better trained, we train them how to kill things,
Right.
we train them how to
Short
blow
form.
things up? How much better could we make their lives if we trained them to make this transition from the military into the civilian world?
Thank you for that. I'm going to make these the closing comments for all of us to respond to these two, but I'm going to also point out, Lisa, stand up. Lisa Rechsteiner happens to be with Philip Morris, but they've just done a major report on all these interviews, encounters that I've done that addresses in part the transition issue. And I will give you my 2-cent, way oversimplified version. If you come out of the military and you're on the radar screen of someone and you talk to a community college or someone in education, your life prospects are radically different than if you're not on someone's radar screen, or you're forgotten, or you're seen as a problem person, or you are a soldier who came out who's just used to taking instruction and you don't know what to do when those instructions. The bifurcation of life experiences is extraordinary when you come out. And I have to tell you, huge numbers of people are not on that screen and are not seeing it. And so there's a whole side of the veterans world where everything seems peachy. Everything seems kumbaya and great. There's another side to it where reality sits in for various people, and it's the part no one wants to talk about. So that's just my little preamble to a longer conversation I'll have with you. But Lisa, who's going to be staying here, she came in a little bit late as of flying down into this, but she'll be at the reception, and you should talk to her. And Lisa, you should give people this report you produced. Okay? Your thoughts, JP?
Summation?
Yeah.
Well,
And reaction to anything you may have heard.
Well, I mean, the engagement in this room has been incredible, and I'm so grateful for all you coming out. If I could ask for an action, after this, just follow along with the case. We're going to cover it with daily news briefings. If you go to the website, you can go to Part 7 and sign up for the email, and we have a court
Give
reporter
them the
in
name
there.
of the website.
Oh yeah, it is homeofthebrave.longlead.com.
Right.
And if you go there, you can sign up for that email. And every day we have a reporter, one of the best legal reporters in the country. She's going to be there starting on Tuesday.
Right.
So, and
Thank you.
that's the first day of the
Kathryn,
trial,
I'm going
right?
to have you go next. Kathryn Monet, your responses, final thoughts?
Well, so I do have one thing for you that I can talk with you about later. There is a really cool pilot program that's kind of an interagency thing where they're actually reaching out to veterans who are transitioning and connecting them with services and supports, but it's very small and as promising. But I think final thoughts are that our housing system is broken and we need to do something to fix it. And I'm so happy that Rob and his merry band out in LA are a major part of that solution.
I'm going to give Rob Reynolds the last word. So, Rob?
Appreciate it. Thank you for everyone that came out tonight. I really appreciate it. And I just wanted to, add into what you were saying. I think that anything that can be done to help people transition when they come out is very important. And equally important, I think it's also something that I didn't realize until I started doing this work, is that a lot of veterans join the military when they're young, 17, 18 years old. And a lot of times that severe mental illness doesn't onset until mid-20s. So you have these kids that join the military at 17, 18, they go to war, they develop PTSD, they get injuries, then they get out by the time they're 21, 22. Next thing you know, they have bipolar, schizophrenia, severe depression, and it just adds on top of everything else. And so in saying that, I think that we need a lot more help with veterans' mental health and ensuring that they can, live close to the hospital, at least in LA, to where they get their medical care and services.
Listen, I added a few minutes of conversation, but wasn't it worth it? Big round of applause for J.P. Pullen, who is the founding editor of Longlead, and our host tonight, Rob Reynolds, who's a veteran advocate, participant in the documentary. I just really am so, he's a guardian for folks. And then Kathryn Monet, CEO of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. Really appreciate all of you joining us. Let's go have a reception. Go say hi to someone you've not met tonight. We'll break up the cabals of Terry and Andy. I mean, these are some very good friends of mine who, there are people in this room who have been deeply engaged in these issues for a long time, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you. Big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you.